Okay, in this video we're going to be looking at how a market gets back to equilibrium after a double shift. So we'll look at all the different types of double shifts that occur and the impact that has on both the quantity traded and the equilibrium price. First of all, I'd like to apologise for the poor print screens. My scanner wasn't working, so I had to scan them off my phone and they don't look very good. But anyway, so first market is we're looking at the oil market in 2015. And that's an example of something that happened where there was a shift in demand to the left because there was less global demand for products, and a shift in supply to the right. It could also be caused by an appreciation of the Australian dollar, which will reduce demand for cars, but also lead to a shift in the right in supply because it'll make it cheaper to import production costs or import raw materials that are used in production. But anyway, with this example, I know I talked about it in the last video, so I want to skip through it relatively quickly. But some key things you need to notice is that because supply shifted right and demand shifted left, we have this massive surplus now at the old equilibrium price. Because we're willing to supply more, because it's our production costs have gone down, or essentially more because there's more global suppliers, and because there's a lack of demand, we've got a big surplus at the old equilibrium price of what should be $100, which should say on the y-axis. So in order to get rid of that massive surplus, we need to lower the price to $50. And when we lower the price, that leads to a contraction in supply because it's less profitable to produce this good, and it also leads into an expansion in demand because it's now more profitable to buy oil at the lower price of $50. So that's the way that we get rid of the surplus. And what's key is what happens to the equilibrium quantity and price. And what happens is the equilibrium price will go down if supply shifts to the right and demand shifts to the left, but the impact on the quantity traded is unknown. Because we have the supply shifting to the right, which can lead to a higher equilibrium quantity, but we've also got the demand curve shifting to the left, it really depends on which curve shifts more. So if you get a question that asks you something that's shifting demand to the left and supply to the right, the impact on the quantity traded is very uncertain. And if you look through your notes that I gave you yesterday, you can show the impact, show the steps that you need to take to get a market back to equilibrium after a shift in supply to the right and demand to the left. The second one is something that will shift demand to the left and supply to the left and demand to the right. So you can see that supply too has shifted to the left, but demand has now shifted to the right. And that could occur because of something like advertising. So advertising will increase the demand for the product if it's effective advertising, but it'll also increase production costs. So what's essentially happened is now at this old price, let's say $20, okay, we've now got demand all the way out here. Demand has increased at that price, but supply has decreased at that price. So demand is here at a quantity of 600, but supply is only at 200. So we've got this massive shortage of stock. How do we get rid of a shortage? Well, we raise the price. And when we raise the price, that leads to both a contraction in demand and an expansion in supply, because it's now more profitable to produce the good. So while the supply curve shifting left and demand curve shifting right will lead to a higher price, because both supply shifting left and demand shifting right leads to higher prices, the impact on the quantity traded is uncertain. Okay, if supply shifts more than the demand curve, so if supply had shifted this far, then the quantity traded would actually have decreased. But if demand shifts more, then the quantity traded will increase. So the change on quantity traded is uncertain when there's a shift in supply to the left and demand to the right. If they both go in the same direction, so if supply shifts right and demand shifts right, it's kind of like saying that suppliers are more willing to supply at any given price and there's more demand at any given price. So this is the old equilibrium quantity and price. Now the supply has gone to this point here because we're more willing to supply, so we might have lower production costs or something like that. But we're also more willing to demand the product, or there's more demand for that product at that new price. So we don't actually have a surplus or a shortage at that new price. We don't really know. It depends whether demand or supply has shifted more. So in this case, we know the quantity new equilibrium will be at a higher quantity, but because we don't know if there'll be a shortage or surplus, we can't say whether the price will increase or decrease. And it's the opposite if supply shifts left and demand shifts left. Okay, if both curves shift left, like in this one here with S2 and D2, we know that the quantity traded is going to be less, okay, because not only is there higher production costs making producers less willing to supply and less demand for the product, but we don't know whether the price is going to increase or decrease. So while quantity will definitely go from Q1 to Q2, we don't know if price will increase or decrease. If supply was to shift more, then prices are likely to increase. If demand shifts by more to the left, then prices are likely to decrease. but it really depends which curve shifts by more. So to sum up, first of all, some examples of double shifts. So both demand and supply shifting to the right might be caused by lower interest rates or lower oil prices for cars. So lower oil prices will increase the demand for cars because it'll be cheaper to run your car once you get it, but it'll also lead to lower production costs for firms. So that will be something that might shift both curves to the right. In terms of something that will shift both curves to the left, higher interest rates will increase production costs, but it will also decrease demand for the product at any given price because people will have less discretionary income. Higher oil prices will lead to higher production costs, making producers less willing to supply, and it will also lead to consumers having less discretionary income after they've paid for petrol and things like that. So that will also lead to a decrease in demand for cars because it will cost them more to run their cars. In terms of supply shifting to the left and demand shifting to the right, something like increased advertising or depreciation of the dollar, which we talked about. Demand shifting left and supply shifting right, that could be an appreciation of the Australian dollar, or it could be would be the main thing that might cause that thing, demand shifting to the left and supply shifting to the right. Okay, in terms of what impact it will have, if both demand and supply shift to the right, okay, the impact on the equilibrium price will be unknown. So if I drew the curves out and then did the demand curve and the supply curve shifting to the right, then the new equilibrium quantity, so that would be the new demand curve, the new supply curve would be here, and we'd end up at this sort of point here. I know that's badly drawn, but basically the change in the price will be unknown, but the change in the quantity will increase. If both curves shift left, then the change in the price will be unknown, but the change in the equilibrium quantity will decrease. And if both of them shift to the right, if demand shifts to the right and supply shifts to the left, then we know the equilibrium price will increase, but the equilibrium quantity will be unknown. And you'll need to draw these to make sense of them yourselves. And if demand shifts to the left and supply shifts to the right, then we will have a new equilibrium price at a decreased price, and the equilibrium quantity will be unknown. But it's really important that you draw all these out for them to make sense. So here's a question from last year's exam that only 22% of people got right. So a really poorly answered question. If a product becomes less popular, okay, now you should see that and go, all right, product's less popular, demand will shift to the left. While at the same time, increased costs of production, again, that will mean supply is shifting to the left. Cause the supply curve to decrease. It can be concluded that which of the following will occur. So we've concluded that demand is shifting left, but supply is also shifting left as well. So what you need to be able to do is draw the curve, okay, and then you will draw the supply curve shifting to the left, as so, but also the demand curve shifting to the left. And you should end up at a point here, which we can conclude that it's a lower equilibrium quantity traded, but the impact on the price is uncertain. Okay, you can see here that it depends which curve shifted further, if demand shifted further or supply shifted further. So the correct answer to this question is that the equilibrium price might rise or fall. We don't know which one will occur, it depends which one shifted by more. So the correct answer to this question is actually A.